So what we'll do here is just basically, as one of your learning objectives says, follow a piece of food, right? As you stick it in your mouth, it goes down your gullet, through the stomach, through the small intestines, through the large intestines, and out the anus eventually, right? And so what we're going to do is just follow it. You could think of like a conveyor belt. As a piece of food is moving through, what's happening to it in any given region of this digestive tract, right? So I can call these regions or particular organs, right? Your esophagus itself is an organ, your stomach's an organ, your small intestine's an organ, but it's just easier to think of in regions because this is a continuous track as it moves along here, right? This is your GI tract. Along the way, we'll also have those accessory organs, your liver. Food is not going to be going through those, okay? So for this first stage, ingestion, right? You're going to stick something in your mouth and you're going to chew it and you're going to break it down into smaller particles, right? This is a necessary part of this whole digestive process, right? If you ever did any kind of cooking, you know that, let's say if you want to cook a potato in water,
18:15.
Then if you throw a whole potato in the water and try to cook it, it's not going to cook evenly. It's going to take a long time. Whereas if you cube it into smaller pieces, you'll have greater surface area all around those small pieces of potato. It'll cook very fast, right? And more evenly, right? So that's what you're doing here. You're just breaking it down into smaller and smaller bits during this mechanical breakdown here, right? So you're going to do that. You're going to shove it down. You're going to swallow it in the back of your throat, and then it's going to go just down, be transported down through the esophagus right here. Right. So this whole first process, right, this is the first stage of digestion, and this is one of your main, one of the main functions of your digestive tract is to digest food. That is break down food particles, right, from food over here down to what's called a bolus, right, that's going to go down your gullet there and then turn into chyme, right, which is going to pass through and go through a different breakdown of that food into smaller and smaller bits, until you get to larger carbs, proteins, and lipids, which are going to be broken down enzymatically, for the most part, into their constitutive molecular components, right? Glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, because that is what's finally going to be absorbed in your small intestine, right? So you're going from this, which is kind of making me hungry right now, into all these very basic elements, right, that can be absorbed into your bloodstream for use, right? So that's your whole mechanical, breaking it down to smaller parts, and then chemical digestion will be breaking down further into carbs, the carbs, proteins, and lipids, and then further and further down into monosaccharides, right? So that first element right here, after you've voluntarily chewed and swallowed it, right, it's gone down the back of your oropharynx and your laryngopharynx area back over here, right? That's going to be a stratified squamous because you have this bolus going down there pressing up against the sides. Remember, your uvula is keeping food and drink from going up into your nasal cavity. Your epiglottis is keeping it from going down your windpipe, right? So there's your bolus. It's been pushed down there voluntarily, skeletal muscles. And then once it gets into the esophagus, right, it's going to move down toward the stomach through a different mechanism, an involuntary mechanism called peristalsis. Right? So this idea or the concept of peristalsis, right? This is movement through the digestive tract. You're moving food forward, passing it from the most proximal part of your mouth toward the anus, right? Distal. And remember that terminology, right? Your mouth, proximal, anus, distal, everything in between will be relative. So that peristalsis is going to move through your digestive tract because your digestive tract has these major muscle lining, right? Your tunica externa, which consists for the most part of these two muscular layers, one surrounding it, your inner layer, and then an outer layer right here, right? So this inner layer, you can see the orientation of these fibers is going to create a squeezing force on this tube, whereas the outer layer is going to create kind of a pulling force, right? And they're going to act together to create this peristalsis movement. And so here's a bolus moving down for instance, your esophagus right here. So it's moving, it's going to be moving proximal to distal right here, and you have this internal and external layer on either side, right? So you're going to get a squeeze, a contraction, because it's muscle, it's smooth muscle, it contracts, and because it's surrounding that tube, it's going to squeeze that short right here, right? So you're going to get a contraction behind the bolus, and then you're going to get a contraction of the external layer over here. And the way you can think of this, right, if you've ever lost a drawstring in a pair of sweatpants or pajamas or something like that, and you want to put the drawstring back in, you put a safety pin or something, and then you kind of thread it through, you hold on to the, you kind of push it through, bunch up the, your sweatpants part, hold on to your safety pin, and then pull the sweatpants part back, and then you've moved that safety pin along the tract. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that's kind of what I think of when I'm doing this whole contraction movement. And basically your outer muscular layers shortening the tube while this stays in place. And then afterwards you get a series of contraction of the circular layer, which pushes that forward. That's what's moving that down. And, again, this whole peristalsis movement, we're going to see that, throughout your digestive tract, in your small intestine, your large intestine as well. We're also going to see it in the urinary system. You'll see that going down the ureters. You'll also see it in the reproductive tract, right? There's these peristalsis movements. That's the way things move within the body right there. All right, so your bolus is moving down your esophagus. Again, this is all a stratified squamous, a protective layer. It's not doing anything but just protecting that layer right there. So your bolus is moving down, and you'll notice it's being squeezed from this muscular tube right here, and then it's going to go into this bigger hollow space right here, right? So your bolus is plopped down in. There's a sphincter right here that'll open up, and will plop down into the stomach area right here. So this open area means that the sort of risk of having abrasion occur right here, that is pressing up against the side, has decreased a lot because you're in a big open space. So you're going to change the epithelial from stratified squamous to a simple layer, right? A simple columnar, which we're going to see all the way through the digestive tract, right? So you're going from stratified squamous to a simple columnar epithelial, which we'll see to the end. All right, so now we've dropped into the stomach. Right? And so at this point, we've already digested some of the food in your mouth for two reasons. You've mechanically digested the food by breaking it into smaller bits, but you've also, because those salivary glands in the mouth are secreting stuff that breaks down carbohydrates for the most part, and some fats, right? So there's salivary amylase and lipase enzymes that breaking down carbohydrates and fats. Your protein hasn't begun to get broken down yet. That will start to occur in your stomach right here. So now it's plopped down into your stomach. And at this point, your stomach is going to slosh this food, this chyme rather. It's going to go back and forth, breaking it down further, both mechanically and chemically, right? So it's going to do these muscular contractions, not quite peristalsis, but it's going to move that, slosh this stomach contents back and forth, breaking it down, right? So in this case, what's going on is this segmentation action. That is, it's mostly squeezing of the circular layers. Your longitudinal layers are doing a little less. And this is just breaking it down into smaller bits. In the meanwhile, there's digestive juices that are being mixed up with this increasingly smaller and smaller pieces of food right here, right? So you've been mixing digestive juices with the food as you're sloshing it back and forth in the stomach. All right, so this is mechanical digestion still. So here's a electron microscopy view of your stomach lining. This darker, this blue right here is a mucus layer. It's a really thick, and it is a bicarbonate, which means it neutralizes some of the stomach acid that is sloshing around up here. And that's going to protect the cells in purple right here that are lining your stomach. Okay? These cells, again, simple columnar cells, these are the cells of your stomach sitting underneath there right here. And then this yellow is your lamina propria right here. So taking a closer look, this is the cartoon version of those simple columnar cells. These pits that you see going down here, are these right here, these gastric pits, and then they go into these gastric glands down here. Right? And then this yellow part, this is the lamina propria. That's this over here, right? So that's the lining of your stomach. And so for this is where we're getting to our chemical digestion, right? We've already started the chemical digestion with the salivary glands, breaking down carbs and fat. These are going to break down protein. And the two cells that you would have to know here of the gastric gland, right? You have these two types of cell that I'm going to ask you about. There's more, but chief cells and parietal cells. So your chief cells are going to be secreting an inactive enzyme called pepsinogen. It's going to be secreting that inactive enzyme, right? This is one that breaks down protein, basically. So it's secreted down here at the bottom of the gastric glands. It moves up, and sooner or later it encounters hydrochloric acid, which is secreted by the parietal cells. Right? And when they mix together, that acidity causes the pepsinogen to turn into the active digestive enzyme pepsin, which goes on to break down the proteins. Right? And the important kind of concept here is that you don't want digestive enzymes damaging the cells here, so they don't really become active until they're farther up here, where there's probably a mucus layer protecting these cells up here. So that's what your chemical digestion, right? Parietal cells, chief cells. The way to remember it is, well, the way it would be easy to remember is if parietal cells secreted pepsinogen, then you just remember parietal pepsinogen. But don't do that because it's the opposite, right? Pepsin is secreted by chief cells. So when you remember this, just remember it's the opposite. Which secretes what, right? Chief cells, parietal cells. All right, so that's in the lining, right? If you look closely at the epithelial, you'll have those gastric glands, which contain those digestive enzymes, and then the circular muscle layer of your tunica media, or tunica externa, is sloshing back this food, right? So it's going to slosh it back and forth, mix it with the digestive enzymes, and then right over here at this end, you got this thing called the pyloric sphincter, because it's in the pyloric region of the stomach, will occasionally open up and spill out a little of this digested or partially digested food into the next region of the GI tract, which is your duodenum, right? This is your first part of your small intestine. And so you're going to do this a little bit at a time because you don't want a whole bunch of acidic chyme, or chyme rather, being spilled out into your small intestine. So you do a little bit, this keeps on breaking down. And if your intestines are full, that'll be controlled at this level right here, right? You can keep it in here as a storage space until there's room for this to move along right here. So your pyloric sphincter is opening, letting a little bit of this acidic chyme into the next region. And so this over here in blue is your duodenum, which nobody could pronounce, including myself. Right? It goes into that first region of the small intestines. And for the most part, if you could see it attached to the stomach, then you know it's the duodenum. And later on down here, that last section of the small intestine, if you could see it attached to the large intestine, then you know it's the ileum. Otherwise, you really can't really tell what's what in here, unless they're color-coded. So it's going to go through your duodenum. Right? So gastric, here's your stomach up here. It's going to secrete the stuff and go through over here until it eventually goes into your large intestine right there. All right, so it's just going to move through these tracts, and different things are going to be happening at different parts of these tracts, right? Each one has a particular function, and you're going to want to know how the histology or different functions might relate to it. Okay, so let's look at that duodenum a little bit closer. Right, so here was your stomach. Over here. And it's releasing a little bit of the chyme into this first region, the duodenum. And so we'll see chyme is going to move through this, and then it's going to move on to the jejunum, right? It's going to be pushed through that peristalsis movement right there. But along the way, some very important things. It's not just a small section. This has some very important functions, right? And mainly, it has to do with these two accessory organs, right? So we're going to kind of step off this whole GI tract and look at what these two accessory organs are doing. So right over here, right? So food is coming down here, and it's going to, here's your duodenum right here. And so there's two things that are going to be happening as it enters the duodenum. Number one, there is going to be bile that is stored in the gallbladder is going to move through these ducts, right? These bile ducts, and be secreted into this region right here, right? And so bile is going to be stored in your gallbladder, and it's going to be squirted into this area right here. Okay, the actual bile is made in the liver, right? So as far as our digestive system function at this point, this is what the liver is doing. It's producing these bile salts a little bit at a time, and then it's storing it. It's being sent over to the gallbladder for concentration and storage. And then that bile will be secreted into the duodenum. So bile is an emulsifier, right? Remember, way up in your mouth, you've digested carbohydrates, you've digested some of your fats, and then in your stomach, you've digested protein. What bile does is further break down the fat, right? So you got a lot of fat still in there. Bile is like an emulsifier. It's going to break up the fat into smaller pieces right there. It doesn't digest it per se. What it's going to do is just break it down into smaller pieces, into kind of manageable parts. That's what your bile is doing right over here. So your bile is moving down from the bile duct, being squirted into the duodenum, right, through this bile duct. And then your pancreatic ducts, from your exocrine pancreas, is secreting other stuff into this region, right? So in this case, what it's secreting is, there's a couple things here. Number one, it's further breaking down proteins, carbohydrates, and fats at this point. So they're making digestive enzymes being secreted into this point. So this is really your last stage of digesting food into smaller particles right here, right, through this pancreatic enzyme, right, juice that's being mixed up in your duodenum. Right, so that's what your pancreas is doing. But your pancreas is also secreting acidic, alkaline sort of buffer juice that's going to help neutralize that acidic chyme right there, right? So it's neutralizing a little bit from the pancreatic digestive or juice that's also digesting it, right? So that's what's going on in your duodenum. When you look at my videos, you'll also see these other glands, these Brunner's glands in the duodenum that are also secreting an alkaline mucus that is also help neutralizing that acidic chyme. All right, so we've broken down carbohydrates, a little bit of fat, proteins, and then down in this first region of your small intestine, we're also doing the last bit of breaking down of the food, right? But at this point, we've gotten down to amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, and small lipids, right? So you're breaking it down to a point where you can actually get it into your blood vessels right here, right? So now we're into this main stage. This is the whole purpose of eating. and everything like that is to absorb those nutrients in order to get all the good stuff, right? So this absorption, again, the whole reason is going to be the movement of particles into the blood, right? Absorption. That's what that is moving it. Because technically, at this point, a piece of food that was turning into those different elements right here, it wasn't inside your body yet, despite being inside this tube. Right here, it was still kind of technically outside your body. So if you ate, you know, some kind of, well, that's not really true. Something gets absorbed in the stomach. Water, alcohol, aspirin and stuff can get absorbed in your stomach, but for the most part, it's still, most of what you ate is inside this tube right here. It's in this last second section of your small intestine, your jejunum, that it's going to be absorbed into your actual bloodstream. All right, absorption. All right, so here's what's going to happen in this absorption area, right? And this mainly we're talking about the jejunum right here, that region right after the duodenum. Right, again, here's your gut tube right here. You have all the same histological layers. You got a mucosal, a lamina propria, you got a submucosa, you got these muscular layers. Food is moving through the lumen of the tract right there. This area is specialized for absorption. How is it specialized for absorption? Number one, you've got these big circular folds right here. Remember when we talked way back about microvilli, what does that do? It increases the surface area, right? Just like the folds in your brain, right? Anytime you see these folds, what you've done is taken, you know, what could have been a flat surface and massively increased the surface area. So you got these three levels of folds that we'll see. These circular folds, and you'll see this also called a plicae circularis, these big folds. And on those big folds, you got these villi, right? These smaller folds. So each one of these has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 little villi on each circular folds right there. Right? And so these villi are going to be lined with that simple columnar epithelia. And on each simple columnar epithelial cell, you have microvilli. Right? So you've increased your surface area a lot. Right? So you're massively increasing your surface area. Why do you want to do that? Because you want to be able to absorb every little bit of glucose and amino acids that you just ate. So here's the duodenum, and then it's going to move through this. This is just the main region of absorption. It's still going to continue through this last section, but this is like when we're talking about the main part of absorption of all the nutrients that you just digested, this is where it's occurring. But this is what you got with that, right? Increasing your surface area. You got the big folds, right? These very macro things. And if you look at, I'm not sure if I put any of the pictures in the cadaver, but you can see these are visible by the naked eye. And then you got these villi. The villi are lined with the simple columnar epithelia. And then each one has the microvilli on top of the cell. You'll see this also referred to as a brush border, right? So here is all your glucose, amino acid, lipids. They're floating inside the lumen, right? Getting inside all the nooks and crannies of in between your villi and in these, what's are called intestinal crypts right there. And then there, right? Anytime anything goes into the body, it's got to pass an epithelial layer. Here, so it's going to go through these simple columnar cells, right? It's going to be actively transported, for the most part, into these villi, which are going to contain the blood vessels that are going to pick up that, right? So you got these arteries running in that could pick up your glucose, amino acids, and absorb them into the bloodstream right there. Right? And then you also have these structures of the lymphatic system right here. These are going to absorb the lipids, right? These lacteals. Right? So this is the whole purpose, right? Getting it in. This is your lumen, and glucose and all that digested macromolecules are going to go in through, pass through the cell wall into your body now. And then one thing I'll mention here, we kind of talked about it with the blood supply, but in that stomach right here, so here's a capillary bed that we just looked at, one of those villi, right? The capillaries are coming in, nutrients and toxins or whatever else you ate that might be in there are absorbed, right? And while we're here too, let me mention a lot of supplement. You see, like you could buy all these fancy collagen stuff. You buy collagen because you think it's good for your skin. Your digestive system breaks it all down into smaller bits. So you have no more than like maybe 2 or 3 amino acids at the most. It's not collagen anymore particularly. I'm just saying. So whatever collagen you eat, it does give you, I guess, the constitutive amino acids, but it's not really collagen anymore. And so that goes for any like big molecule that you eat. It doesn't necessarily go into your body as what you ate it as, right? Some things are small enough to get absorbed, right? And they will go in. So here's where all your nutrients and whatever else you ate is going to be absorbed. So it's going to pass through that capillary bed. But remember, with all those vessels in your stomach, in your small intestines, in your large intestines, they don't feed back directly into your inferior vena cava. They go through that portal system, right? Those blood is going to leave through those gastric or intestinal veins, and then it's going to pass through the liver first. And so all those nutrients here, your liver is going to decide, oh, I need a lot more glucose. I'm going to take it in and break it down. No, I don't need any more glucose. I'm going to make it, store it into glycogen. Oh, look, here's all those amino acids you got from collagen. We don't need that. I'm going to make it into something we do need, or maybe break it down into something else, right? Alcohol is being processed right here. Any drugs and stuff like steroids, all the drugs you take and stuff are processed in the liver. That's why the liver is very prone to damage, right? It's taken in, it takes a lot of abuse. All right, so everything that you just ate is going to be run through your liver for the liver for the most part. And then from there, it'll be collected, go out through the hepatic vein and into your inferior vena cava there to be returned into your system. So that's all going on. You've the major area of your digestion, and that's going to continue on. There's not really a whole lot to say in my video. I talk a little bit about the ileum and those lymphoid tissues, but maybe watch the lymph video first. I put that up in the vascular section. In any case, the last stage of the small intestine is the ileum. It leads into the first section of the large intestine, the cecum. Here, so you got this ileocecal valve right here that's passing your digested, or rather the rest of the products that haven't been digested, into this last area of the GI tract, your large intestines, right? So that first part is called the cecum. It's being secreted here. Also note, this is the appendix right here. This is when you have it, it's packed full of immune cells right there. So this is one place that's, kind of crucial for kind of controlling actually passage back into the small intestine right there. So your large intestine is going to be jam-packed with all sorts of bacteria and stuff that you don't want going backwards into your body or anything. All right, but basically it's going to move through your large intestine right here as what at this point it's gone from a bolus to chyme and digested products, and it's going to turn into feces at this point. Right, this is all the rest of the stuff that we didn't want, and now it's just going to pass slowly through, and you're going to reabsorb as much water as you need. There's also going to be some vitamin reabsorption through this area, but mostly you're just moving it through, reabsorbing water, right, as that big mass of compacted feces moves through your large intestine. And so going in from your ileum, passing in, and they have these different regions right here, your cecum, your ascending colon. This right here, remember your liver is over here, so this is your hepatic flexure. It's going to pass through the transverse colon, where it's going to pass by your splenic flexure, because your spleen's right here. And then it's going to pass down the descending colon, bend around over here through the sigmoid colon, and then into the rectum. So again, things are going to be moving through this whole thing. And again, watch the video for some of the special features of this, including your Taenia coli right here. This is a external sort of part of your external muscular externa. And you don't have to identify these little things, but if you do see them on a cadaver, you know you're looking at the large intestine and not the small intestine, these little appendages right here. And then what's missing here would be that mesenteries that we talked about, right? Those would be covering those blood vessels. And again, we'll go over all that tomorrow a little bit. All right, so that big mass of compacted feces is being moved along your large intestine, going around the sigmoid colon. As it goes around this area, it's pressing up against, if you have a large enough poopy right here, it's moving up against your walls right here. That's causing these sensory fibers, which are embedded in here, these visceral sensory fibers, to pick that sort of stretch up. That's going to go back to your, if this is a parasympathetic, so this will probably be your sacral region right here. It's going to go back in and tell your other motor neurons here, your visceral motor neurons, it's going to contract over here, kind of squeeze the duty out here, and then it's also going to relax your internal anal sphincter, okay, which is part of that lining your muscular externa right there. Right, so that would, just by nature, if you didn't have any control over this, that would kind of eliminate the feces out. You do have the external anal sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. Again, remember that's under voluntary control, so that every time you get this reflex, you don't poop your pants. All right, so that's that whole summary of this. Digesting food, food moving down, getting digested here in the mouth, getting digested here in your stomach, a little more in your duodenum, and then being absorbed, the food stuff being absorbed in your small intestine, and then what's not absorbed, well, that is what the waste products moving through your large intestine and where water is being reabsorbed there. Right? So that's it, right? Just follow the food as it goes down. What's happening in each particular region, and how would you, looking at the histology section of it, how would you kind of relate that structure to its particular function?